This episode of the podcast is brought to you by New Bloom Labs.
Cannabis producers that are creating innovative products with multiple cannabinoids need the best, most comprehensive potency analysis there is. And New Bloom Labs understands the cannabis industry and what's important to growers, processors, and manufacturers. They have the fastest turnaround time in the industry, delivering most test results in just one business day. New Bloom Labs is leading the industry with potency testing of Delta 8, Delta 9, 2 isomers of Delta 10, and a dozen other major and minor cannabinoids that are shaping the industry. So if you've ever questioned your lab's potency reports of any of your cannabis products, it's time you tried New Bloom Labs. They'll deliver the most precise product analysis in the country and show you the raw chromatography to back it up. Give them a call at 844-TEST-CBD or visit their website at newbloomlabs.com. Superior science, rapid results, New Bloom Labs.
This episode of the podcast is brought to you by Canna Health.
We talk a lot on this podcast about the future of personalized cannabinoid therapeutics. But what exactly does that mean? It means understanding your own genetics and taking action by regulating your endocannabinoid system through optimal cannabis and CBD experiences. EndoDNA is the world's first and most comprehensive personalization platform focusing on the endocannabinoid system tailored to your specific DNA. In other words, EndoDNA is a simple DNA test that maps your entire endocannabinoid system and then matches that summary with a specific cannabinoid ratio and terpene profile that is aligned with your unique genotype. Imagine a roadmap to your best cannabis experience that is tailored to your unique needs and body chemistry. Visit their website at endodna.com/products to purchase the EndoDNA collection kit and Endo Decoded report and use the promo code CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. Again, that website is endodna.com/products, and the promo code to use is CONNECT15 for a 20% discount. The future of personalized cannabinoid therapeutics is here with EndoDNA. Hello, my fellow people of the plant. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Cannabinoid Connect podcast, your favorite podcast that includes industry-facing conversations with the industry's leading experts that aim to educate and inform the public regarding the plant's endless benefits. My guest today is Carlos Perea. He's the co-founder and CEO at Terra Vera. Hello, Carlos. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me.
Of course, yes. Thank you so much for coming on today and making time for me and my audience. So, Carlos, I know that your background, you're a serial entrepreneur, but there's some ties between two different industries. You like to focus on the technology, but then also the social impact side. And from what I've gathered, you formed, is it Miox?
Miox, correct. Yeah.
Miox Corporation. It's a company that treats water supply in a variety of different ways, but then also you co-founded Azuka, and I actually had Ron Silver on the podcast previously. And so tell me about your background and kind of what led you to cannabis.
Yeah, sure. So I think you picked up on the notion of, social impact entrepreneur. And I guess there's other names for it, double or triple bottom line, investing or innovating, if you will. So I didn't really know that was in my DNA. I knew as an entrepreneur, I spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley working for other people on technology companies. And I got fortunate and I found a company called Miox. I didn't start the company, but I acquired it early in its commercialization phase. And that company was dedicated to treating water anywhere, anytime to make it drinkable. It started for the US military and still used there. And then we got into public drinking water systems, and the goal was to replace hazardous chemicals. So anyway, we acquired that company and I ran it for a number of years. And I started to understand that the world is not a very fair place. Unfortunately, there's a lot of folks who don't have access to reliable power or water. You being in Dallas, you probably realized how important that is. You take it for granted and we don't have it.
Absolutely.
So,
yeah.
Yeah. So imagine now 2/3 of the population kind of living that way day to day, not knowing where they're going to get drinkable water. And that just became a big focus of ours, even though we had a lot of industrial and commercial applications. We got on cruise ships. We were in naval installations and naval ships. We were in the drinking water systems around the globe, treating water in buildings, pool water, cruise ship water. but always in my back of my head, I really wanted to have a big impact socially. So we partnered a lot with people like Coca-Cola and others to bring water into places of the planet that didn't have access. So that kind of got me started, that business can be a force of good. This is kind of back in the early 2000s. There certainly were a lot of folks who were thinking along the same lines, but B Corps weren't as well known, maybe even established. Those kinds of ideas weren't as popular, perhaps. But I always told my teams that we could do well by doing good, and that's never stopped. And that, in a weird way, led me into cannabis.
I mean, in a weird way, from your perspective, right? But I mean, a natural kind of move, given the social impact perspective that cannabis brings to the forefront, right? I mean, in so many different ways, whether it's unrighting the wrongs in terms of social injustice that's happened where people have been locked up for the plant and now it's deemed essential business and legal in some states, right? But then also like the economic impact that cannabis and hemp can have, as well as environmental benefits. I mean, it kind of, the list goes on and on.
Yeah, I think you're citing the fact that cannabis kind of sits in this really interesting intersection of all these issues. And quite frankly, I got into it by accident. I sold my previous company, Myox. I did some work for some venture capitalists. I was looking for what I wanted to do next, and an old employee of mine had gotten into the cannabis space in Oregon, and he asked me to help him out. And I liked him as an individual, but I did not know much about cannabis. I'm not a lifelong user or advocate. But to your point, I started to see this interesting business that was emerging, and not only the injustices and the fact that we've made it historically illegal and we've allowed alcohol and other things is kind of crazy. And I think in 100 years, we'll look back and say, what were we thinking? Um, but I also got fascinated by the medical aspect. And I'm a big believer in our food systems moving from natural to processed back to natural. I think medicine is doing the same thing. I think we got very fixated on Farmageddon, on taking a pill to make me lose weight, taking a pill to help me sleep, taking a pill to, do whatever. And that reliance on pharmacological solutions, I think, is now quickly being replaced by cannabis and plant-based solutions. So I love that trend. And then to your point, I really love the kind of the social leveling, if you will. Anybody can be successful in cannabis. There aren't winners and losers like other industries where you have to go to the right school and you have to have the right background and pedigree. It's kind of a wide open market. And so I love that aspect about it. It's going to create a lot of new successful entrepreneurs, be minorities or females. It doesn't really matter, which I like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the 2 points you raise, I want to piggyback on them. The one is that pendulum swing that we're seeing from like natural to processed, whether it be food or even now in medicine, and that's been echoed on this podcast. There's been experts that have talked about this kind of marrying of Eastern and Western medicine, right? Because it's not to totally disregard what we've done on the pharmaceutical side, but to your point, some of these pills that we're just taking for management where it doesn't help, or in fact sometimes it makes you worse. There's a reason to be looking at plant-based medicines, right, and plant-based alternatives.
Yeah, tremendously. I mean, I think not only um, for a whole host of reasons, but one is the one you've mentioned, which is we've created a lot of unintended consequences, unfortunately. So, if you ever really pay attention to the ads that we run here for Pick Your Medicine, they kind of zoom through at the end and may cause baldness, loss of memory, and 10 other, negative symptoms. We kind of run through that because we're interested in whatever the benefit is. And, unfortunately, in our society here in the US in particular, I think we've gotten fixated on short term solutions that often have a worse outcome in the long run. The cure is worse than the disease itself. And I think cannabis and this whole movement in this natural direction are people kind of taking back their own health. I was struck years ago when somebody told me, and at first I couldn't believe it. I had to go read and research this for myself, that 80% of the issues that we treat medically are things that are preventable from lifestyle choices, right? If we eat well and we take care of ourselves, we eliminate 80% of the problems we have in our society around health.
Right.
And
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to, of course, exercise, good habits like that, but also the things that you're consuming. And that what brings up the second point of what you said and how the market is just so vast, right? I mean, like what I'm fascinated about is there's not someone said it, I don't know who it was, but like there's really no culture in cannabis because the culture is the plant and the affinity for the plant. So, whether you're a young college student ripping a bong in your dorm, or if you're an older, elderly person who's rubbing CBD cream on your shoulder, or far in between, right? I mean, it kind of touches everybody in a different way and they consume it in different ways.
Yeah, correct. And again, I have an appreciation for folks who use it recreationally in addition to or instead of alcohol or other recreational, um, activities. But I'm fascinated by the medical aspect. I'm fascinated by how it can help us sleep. It can help us focus. It can help us be more creative. And that was one thing that was fascinating to me. I had the good fortune of being in a place where I could talk with and employ people who had a lot more expertise than I did. And I'll never forget, there was a company that was pitching me on the notion of using this for cosmetic reasons, that as it could help with skin blemishes topically, and you could use it for oily skin or dry skin. And I looked at this person, I said, you can't tell me the same product can be used to help somebody with dry skin and oily skin. And then they proceeded to tell me about our, endocrine, or not endocrine, our
Endocannabinoid system.
endocannabinoid. Thank you.
Yeah.
Struggling with the wording this today. The endocannabinoid system and this whole idea of homeostasis.
Yeah.
And that our bodies want to return to a natural state. And then I got more exposure to that concept. I had the good fortune of hiring somebody who was fascinated by this for performance enhancement. That athletes have liked to take cannabis, not just to help them relax or recreate, but it helps us recover faster and it helps us get our sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system back in alignment. And so the more I started reading about this, it's easy to get carried away and say, hey, it's a cure all. And in some aspects, perhaps it is, but it gets into these whole aspects of the cannabinoids and the terpenes. And I think we've only begun to scratch the surface, quite frankly. I think we're on the cutting edge of this.
Yeah, 100%. And just to echo off that, I had Len May on recently. He's the CEO of Endocanna Health. And basically, I'll explain what the company does, but then what he was talking about. So the company basically does a DNA screening of your endocannabinoid system, and then they provide recommendations based on your genetic makeup and your biology, what your body best responds to when it comes to cannabinoids, terpenes, flavonoids, all those different things that kind of affect your behavior and your mood, right, and your feeling. And we were talking about is just that point. Like everyone's different. Our biological and genetic makeup is all different, so we respond to different things differently. But each strain, each type of flower, each a cannabinoid, secondary compound, they're all so different in what they can do. So dialing in and matching up, okay, this percentage of this cannabinoid CBD with CBN will help your biological makeup because your body responds to that better. You'll be able to sleep. But if you do too much of it, then you'll be paranoid. And so it was just very fascinating how you said that homeostasis, kind of keeping everything in balance, because that's ultimately what our ECS is.
Yeah, and it's like I said, I think it's cutting edge. We've unfortunately not been able to do much research in this area, and I'm glad you mentioned it. Though I'm involved and have been involved in Azuka, which is about body bioavailability, body absorbing these compounds. But I'm also involved in another early stage company called Budboard. I think their name doesn't do them any service, but they started out doing displays, for dispensaries, and then they started collecting user data. And so if you were a consumer, you'd go in and you'd say, hey, I have this Bubba Kush, or pick your flower. And then they would ask you, well, how did you respond to it? Same thing with edibles. And users would come back and say, well, that made me feel relaxed, but not overly, sedative. Or this one made me feel really creative. And so I started taking that data, and then they use artificial intelligence or machine learning, and they correlate that to the science, particularly around terpenes, which we have studied. And you find that people react to terpenes almost in many ways more so than cannabinoids, but they're not in intuitive ways. So you could take one terpene that will make you feel one way and another that might make you feel something different. You combine them and you get very unexpected results. And so again, I think that's a fascinating area. I'm glad I get to dabble in it, but that's not my day job. I get to worry about how do we make sure those products are safe
Right.
getting to the consumers. That's really what Terra Vera is all about.
I know, yeah, and I get down the rabbit hole because it's just so fascinating, right? But let's talk about Terra Vera. So, I believe that y'all are headquartered in my home state where I grew up, New Mexico. Is that right?
I'm glad that you're a fellow New Mexican that found this way to Dallas. But yes, we really trace the origins all the way back to the Los Alamos National Laboratory. Actually, is where the core of the technology was never envisioned for cannabis nor agriculture, but nonetheless, it was kind of a reactor, if you will, to generate some chemistry. And that's kind of why the technology started here. And myself and my partner love New Mexico, and so we're fortunate to be able to run the company from here.
Yeah, and from what I, have gathered just visiting and even working with people in New Mexico is that the medical program is operating and it's well and good. And then you've also got hemp, obviously, which was passed during the 2018 Farm Bill. But I think the legislature just passed a bill where they're going to vote on full adult use at some point. Is that right?
Yeah, I like to see New Mexico not be last in something good, because often we're kind of lagging behind the country in terms of new trends. But many of us are hopeful we'll see it pass this time legislatively. I'm probably more pessimistic. I think it will probably wait for a referendum that'll go to the public next year, because there's an election cycle. So 2022 technically. But I think it's inevitable that we'll get it state by state, and New Mexico will be one of the next ones. I think, quite frankly, the feds will eventually, probably within this administration, also pave the way. But the stats are pretty compelling. I think we're up to 40 states now medically and 15 adult use. And quite frankly, if you count the illicit market, everybody has access to cannabis that wants access to cannabis. And I think that's one of the things we don't talk about enough is, if we don't do this well, we're going to keep those illicit markets alive and well. And that's part of what I want to see is happen is, I'm all for home grows. I'm all for people who can do this on more of an individual craft basis. But unfortunately, there's still a lot of bad product coming in the illicit market. And when I mean bad quality, bad byproducts, bad things for you to consume. And unfortunately, that's happening also on the regulated side as well. That's today we have a patchwork of regulations that don't make sense. If you've ever talked to a cultivator, they're kind of handcuffed. They're trying to grow best product, and they can't have any molds, yeast, bacteria for safety reasons. And that's important. And it's important that users know that, unlike food products, a lot of these molds and mildews and biologicals will get you very, very sick. So on the one hand, they're regulated for pathogens. On the other hand, they're regulated for pesticides. So it's one of the reasons Terra Vera is focused in this space, is the cultivators in cannabis have a really limited number of good tools and are really facing a lot of challenges to get their product to market, and make sure that it's both quality and make sure it's affordable. So that's one of the reasons we focus on cannabis.
It's an important role that Terra Vera plays because, to your point, like the federal legal regulation has really, you know, there's been an unintended consequences, like you mentioned, the snake oil that's coming into the market, the low quality of products, the products that have harmful chemicals in them, whether it be pesticides, mycotoxins, heavy metals, things like that, right? So that regulation is definitely needed and wanted, right, at this point. So, like, tell us about Terra Vera's technology and what exactly y'all do to help these cultivators.
Sure. So it's kind of important to know that what we're doing is really applicable to all agriculture. And ultimately, our long-term goal, is to replace the synthetic pesticides that are used in such quantities around the globe. Here in the US, we use about 1 billion pounds of pesticides a year on our food crops predominantly. And the reality is, we know through science that these are not good for our bodies. These are not good for our environments. And quite frankly, in many cases, they're not good for the crops themselves. The reason we started really looking at cannabis was cannabis cultivators have a couple of unique situations. One, they have a stricter set of regulations on what they can and can't put on their crops. And then they're tested for these biologicals, sometimes at levels that you would never see in food. So very minute quantities. And Unfortunately, they have had very limited tools in their toolboxes. So what we ultimately want to do is just give them a better set of technologies and tools to grow better product.
Yeah, and when you said that they're handcuffed, like that, they're like you. What you're saying basically is they're set at a higher standard when it comes to reportings of these things and whatnot. Because like basic like food tests wouldn't go through that type of process, would it? Or
Generally not, but there is an important reason besides the political reasons, right, of wanting us to be ultra conservative on cannabis. When you think about putting a pesticide on a grape or a apple or pick your food, one, we have the perception that you can wash it off. Sometimes that's possible. A lot of times it's not because of the porosity of the product. So you do ingest a lot of pesticides. But when you ingest something, the health effects are often not as acute as when you combust something. So when we smoke cannabis as opposed to an edible, often those mold and mildews can really cause serious health issues, even in small quantities. So there are some legitimate technical reasons to have stricter standards. I would contend though that most of the standards really don't make sense holistically, and we're seeing every state kind of set it up on an individualized basis. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is cultivators in some states can use a variety of pesticides to control this, and they're not regulated. In other states, they're tested for residual pesticides as well. And they're kind of, pardon my language, but damned if they do, damned if they don't.
Mhm.
And again, that's where Terra Vera comes in, because the alternative really is to remediate. And that's what we see a lot of folks do. If you go to Canada, a lot of the product that you might consume there is irradiated, kind of like what we do with food. I think most people in the US and most people in Canada, quite frankly, and around the world, don't want to have irradiation on their product.
right.
And even if you do that successfully, it's kind of treating it after the fact. And Terra Vera can remediate, but our big issue is how do we prevent it from happening in the first place? So we have a technology that you can actually spray on a plant, and you can prevent that plant from getting these bacteria, these pathogens. And guess what? The plant actually is healthier. It's happier. It expresses its cannabinoids better, has better chirping profile. It's going to yield better. So you not only have a plant that's safe for the consumer, but you get better results for the business. And that's important to us in Terra Vera. We're not trying to make these negative trade-offs of, hey, the consumer's happy, but the business can't be sustainable, or the business is happy, but the consumer's getting, screwed over with an inferior product. We want both. And we think we have a technology that can help with that.
Is there? I mean, yeah, this is a technology that, frankly, I haven't heard of. Is there other competitors out there? I mean, you don't have to name them, but I'm saying, is there others that are doing this? And like, I mean, is this a huge differentiator, basically?
It is. We have alternative uh, processes, if you will. So competition in the form of people who are using processes on the back end to remediate or to prevent the pathogens. We often see people using ozonation, and we also see irradiation now coming into the market. So those are the folks who are trying to kill the pathogens after it's been grown. And then on the front end, we see people trying to prevent the pathogens through better environments, which helps, better genetics, which can help, but that has limitations. And then people in legitimate ways will use homeopathic solutions. So oils, neem oil, pick your oil. Most of those are not particularly effective. So you're kind of caught between, how do I prevent this as much as possible? And then if I don't prevent it, how do I remediate? We kind of sit in a different space. We actually can do both, but we do it with a technology that is compliant. So we often don't hear this in the space, but we are EPA compliant, meaning the EPA sees what we do and understands what we do. And then despite that, we have to go state by state by state and go get approval. So we're seeing, I guess, competitive solutions, but nothing that does what Terra Vera does, and that's really why we formed the company. Was we thought this is too important to not bring to the market.
Right, right. And as I mean, you mentioned going state to state. So are you compliant, EPA compliant in every state in which that has an operating cannabis market?
We have approached, I think, 6 states so far and had success in all of them. I think we have one pending, but we also are in the process. We have an EPA registration. We're in the process of refreshing that so they know exactly what we're doing. And once we have that, we don't anticipate having problems in any of the states. But the EPA gives us a regulation, and then the states still have to give us a determination, if you will. So we're focused on states where those markets are more regulated or those growers have more problems. So you see us a lot in Florida, you see us a lot in California. We're just entering the Oregon market. I'm excited that we're actually here in New Mexico because it's nice to do business in our home state. But we're constantly expanding.
And do these grow operations in like where your technology fits in? Are these primarily outdoor, indoor, greenhouse? Does it kind of vary?
It varies. We have started really with the indoor crops because those are the highest cost and the penalty for failure is the highest, if you will. And it sounds counterintuitive, but indoor and perhaps greenhouse to some extent, those crops are actually more susceptible. You would think they'd be less susceptible to these pathogens. The problem is once you get a pathogen in your indoor grow or your greenhouse, it spreads very, very quickly. Um, but we are applicable to outdoors as well as indoor, and we're starting to treat hemp crops. We've got inquiries to treat other high value added crops. I think you'll see us in hops, and you'll probably see us in wine grapes. I suspect before the year's out.
Hmm. This is an interesting trend that I've come across, and I don't. It's probably not related to your business, but it's something that is interesting when you talk about pathogens and how mold can accrue when it, on these plants and on the buds. Is this notion of like hemp cultivations versus THC farms, right? And how there's really this need for zoning laws. Like I think I heard that Humboldt County actually banned hemp farms in that area because of the fact that the plants are being feminized due to pollination and it's ruining the crops, right? Have you heard that?
Yeah, no, I've been tracking this for a long time. I probably didn't highlight this for you or for the viewers, but I started my career first with a vertically integrated group in Oregon, and then I became COO of one of the larger multi-state operators. So I got to see a lot of the issues that we were facing, including the ones that Terra Vera is helping to solve. But when I saw the farm bill passing and I saw what was going on with hemp, I knew intuitively that there was going to be a collision. That people who want to grow crops outdoors for THC purposes and the hemp folks who are growing crops outdoors by definition, just because of the cost and the value of the crop and the feminization issue. So we're going to see more of those issues. Um, the reality is they're kind of the same plant. They just happen to have a different cannabinoid expression. The fact we've chosen to regulate it at the levels we have is a little bit arbitrary, quite frankly. So you'll probably see some of that change. But yeah, the notion of growing indoors and outdoors, I think that will stick around for a while. There's going to be connoisseurs who really want the highest quality, or we're going to be growing for cannabinoids that are very difficult to get, THCV or others, and you'll see a mix of indoor and outdoor. So that's, I think, a trend to continue to watch.
Yeah, I just hope that like I mean I don't know if banning is the answer, right? Like
No, it's not. It's almost never the answer.
okay,
Almost.
okay. Right. I didn't think so, and I'm glad you said that because like ultimately, and look, I know that the THC operators they've been around for a while, especially in California and these other states, but as a whole, right? We want this industry to move as a whole together and to start tribing up and start, I'm kind of hearing a little of that, like, oh, we don't like the hemp growers, we don't like the, and it's look, we're all after the same goal ultimately. If we can figure out zoning laws or some way to kind of work together, I think would be the best outcome, but hey.
And we have that probably even more so, just so you kind of think about it in this perspective. And I've heard that the pollination issue can go 50 miles or more. So just banning it next door is not going to help, right? Depending on the prevailing winds and the pollination issues. But we have the same thing with wine grapes, with other crops. When people spray pesticides, I've seen crops fail because not of anything the grower was doing, but because next door, 5 acres over, somebody sprayed their crops for whatever, and they got residual pesticides picked up in the air handling system. And guess what? They fail for that. I've seen crazy failures for heavy metals on trying to use organic solutions, and somewhere in the supply chain, there was heavy metals introduced. So all of these quality issues are going to continue to be at the forefront, and we're just scratching. Just like we were talking about cannabinoids and terpenes, I think the pathogens were kind of at the front end of that as well. So
Yeah.
a lot
Yeah,
more.
no, when you put it that way, like it's not a new problem basically. Like within grapes and all that you kind of mentioned, it's just something that we need to start solving for, right?
Yep. And I could tell you some funny stories of growers who couldn't figure out what was going on with their crops, that there was something that had nothing to do with what they were doing. It was next door, down the road. I'll keep this one brief, but literally there was a cultivator who had invested in indoor shipping container grows. And he was so excited about the self-contained units, and they had lights and ventilation, and he was going to grow the best possible cannabis. And his plants kept dying, halfway into flower. And it happened over, and he fired his grower and he hired another one, and it happened, and he couldn't figure it out. Well, ultimately what happened was his containers were in a warehouse next to some avocados that were being stored as part of a distribution. And when they would gas the avocados to ripen them, invariably some that got in his air handling system would kill his plants. And he thought he had lost millions and millions and millions of dollars and was failure at this. And he figured it out by accident, and ultimately moved his containers into another facility and had no problems ever again.
Oh my gosh. I hope that so first off, he probably stopped beating himself up, because he probably thought he was the worst grower in the world. And then I hope he gave the person he fired an apology or brought him back or something,
I hope so too. I never trace it down to that level, but the world's just full of those stories. And kind of circling it back to Terra Vera, it's not difficult to kill a pathogen or bacteria or virus. What's difficult is do it without creating damage or unintended consequence, right? Pesticides work really well. Take Roundup, weed killer, works really, really well. Get rid of your weeds. Well, the problem is it's there for 20 years, 30 years in the soil, and nothing else will grow.
Right.
So you were happy to kill your weeds, but now you want to put your garden and your soil's ruined. So it's those unintended consequences that we really want to focus on. And that's a lot of what we spend time on, is how do we do this in a way that doesn't trade one problem for another problem?
Right. No, that makes total sense. So Carlos, tell me, what is Terra Vera's plans for 2021 and beyond, especially with, the reform that we're probably about to see really soon here at the federal level?
So we are today, like I said, somewhat focused on cannabis. We're now entertaining customers in other markets. We will probably introduce some more holistic services. I think our customers are asking us not just to come in and help them with their chemistry or the integrated pest management, but can we help them overall with their product quality? And can we actually even not just give them or sell them the technology? Can we actually come in and do the services for them? So you'll see us go down that market. I think the more interesting and exciting part for me anyway, leading this, is I think you'll see us get into the international markets. Canada is already knocking on our door. They've got some real quality issues there. I'd be surprised if we don't get into some of these other markets further south and here in the Americas, but I suspect we'll actually be in Europe as well. It may or may not be with cannabis, maybe with some other crops.
Sure.
But I've had the good fortune of running companies that do a lot of international work, and to me that's also fascinating. So I'm hoping we go in that direction as well.
Well, that sounds exciting. Sounds like the company has got some good, plans for expansion, both within the States and internationally. So look forward to following y'all's progress. Where can people find your social media and website if they want to learn more?
Yeah, if they just go to www.terravera.com, so Terravera. And if folks haven't figured out or didn't take Latin, it loosely translates into beautiful or true earth. And again, that's kind of our mission. You can find our LinkedIn equally easily, and we're on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Instagram, all those places. And we love interacting, with our clients. We love interacting with the population and the public in general. The regulators, it's amazing how often we get them asking us questions and interacting with us. But what we really stand for is making the place, the planet, and our population, our health, and our environment better. And we're doing that through business. But we're learning as well. So when we make mistakes, we want to hear about it from folks, or if we've got opportunities, we want to hear about it from folks. And we want to be out there as much as possible, educating the community on how they can create better product.
Absolutely. Yes. Well, hey, very well said. I really appreciate your time and all your insights, and hopefully, fingers crossed, if New Mexico policymakers can get it together and get that bill through, maybe we can celebrate next time I'm visiting home.
I would love that. I suspect we'll beat Texas, but you never know.
I think you'll definitely beat Texas. Yeah, we barely have a minimal medical program right now, so we got a ways to go. All right. Well, thanks, Carlos, and thank you all for listening. Bye.
Have a good day.